All right, what is up, everybody? We are live here on Facebook and on Instagram. And in today's weekly Wednesday live video, we're going to be talking about the mentality that you should have during prep. So last week, this was brought up to me by Jeff Cook, and he kind of wanted me to talk about my perspective on, kind of keeping your head on straight when you're in prep. So we're going to dive into it, and I just see that Jeff just joined us. So he said he's going to be watching today. So Jeff, I do appreciate you giving me the topic, and we're going to just get right to it. So one of the kind of questions or comments, it's not necessarily like this was going to be a true Q&A like it has been in the past. It's going to be a little bit different just because of what we are, what we're talking about. So today we're going to be talking about one thing is become obsessed during contest prep. And Julie brought that up, and Sam mentioned it a little bit. And it is tough. It is honestly very tough not to become obsessed when you are in a contest prep, just because you devote yourself for months at a time, sometimes years at a time. People are really taking a long time, and they have really high hopes, and they don't want to screw it up. Just to be plain and simple. So when you put in literally hours every day in the gym, when you restrict yourself for months and months and months, it's hard not to become obsessed. And I could see where some people might feel that way. And I would say that, yeah, I do feel that way from time to time. This year, really not so much, if I had to say it. I know I'm not too deep into prep right now, but and I'll kind of cover this a little bit later, is what I've been doing. So I do have a few notes. That's why I just keep looking off to the side. So Julie asked, is it normal to feel obsessed? So I would say yes. It would be normal to be obsessed, with your contest prep, just because if you aren't really fired up about it, if you aren't giving it 100% every day, then why are you doing it in the first place? I've told this to everybody before. This is not the easiest thing that we do to ourselves, that we do to our bodies. So if you weren't 100% into it, then why bother? It's not fun to restrict yourself for months at a time, and to get to a very, very low percentage of body fat. So that's tough. I could definitely see how that could mess with somebody and then become obsessed. On the second part, so I say yes, that was normal. And then Julie asked, do I experience this? I would say yes. In my past preps, I have, especially the one where I was, fighting for my pro card. That one, just because I knew what was on the line, trying to become a pro, and that was a big statement, that I wanted to make, and I set my goals very high. So I probably applied a lot of pressure to myself. And with that pressure became obsession. And I know that some of my clients and some of my previous clients say that they go to the gram when it comes to tracking their food and stuff like that. And that is definitely an obsessive nature. They have to hit every rep of every set. But I also can appreciate that, because that means that you're all in. And I really like that nature. And then the last thing Julie said was that, is this a bad thing? I really don't feel like it's a bad thing unless you get carried away with it. And I actually just watched a Instagram video of Doug Miller from Core. And he said, being today Valentine's Day, that first and foremost, your relationships should be the thing that you focus on the most. Just because of bodybuilding as a whole, it just occupies a lot less of our time than our relationships. So for instance, by the time I can compete on stage this year, I might do 4 or 5 shows, but really that show time in comparison to the time that I spend with my wife and my family is going to be very small. So I don't want that like to ruin my relationships, and I don't want that obsession to ruin my relationships, kind of going hand in hand with that. Now, on to another kind of part. Jeff was talking about embracing the suck, or thinking like you have to suffer. So I get where he's coming at, because I think a lot of people get afraid when they start to feel bad, and they think about backing out, and they just don't know how to push the limits of their body. So as I said earlier in the video, this sport is definitely not for the faint of hearted, because it's really tough what we do to our bodies for an extended period of time. No other sports. I mean, I know every sport's tough in its own right, but bodybuilding really is 24/7. In my opinion. It is very tough to do that for a long time. And let's see what you have to say here. We got a comment that says, "Are people asking Sean or Chloe if they were obsessed about snowboarding leading into 2020 Olympics? Champions required to be focused and passionate." Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. There is a big difference between just being engulfed in snowboarding or in bodybuilding. I could only assume that it is not their entire life. They do have relationships outside of snowboarding. I mean, I know that's how they make their living. Bodybuilding is how I make my living. I mean, by coaching, not necessarily competing. But people should have relationships and a life outside of the sport. So God forbid, let's say like somebody like Shaun White or this Chloe Kim, I think she's referring to, were to get hurt, and they would have a career-ending injury. I'm not wishing that upon them, of course. I hope I stay healthy throughout my entire career. But if bodybuilding were to be taken away from me, if snowboarding were to be taken away from them, would they still exist as a person? Is Shaun White more than just a snowboarder? Is Chloe Kim more than just a snowboarder? And I hope the answer is yes. That's something that they have to reflect upon themselves. But I've talked this with my wife before, that if I were to stop bodybuilding, I would still want to coach, obviously, but I would be okay with not being able to, beat up my body, do the things, restrict myself, if it was going to cause me physical harm and it was just poor for my health. Now, what I think how I do right now and spacing my preps out like I have been, I don't think it has any negative impact on me. But let's say, God forbid, I were to like break a leg and not be able to train like that, or anything, just whatever, get in a bad car accident, like I would still be Brandon Wadas, just not a bodybuilder. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost within the sports, is they become obsessed with the one thing, they become obsessed with who they are. So I'll just use Doug as an example again, just because I brought him up already. So obviously Doug is like a world champion bodybuilder, and he honestly doesn't even compete that much anymore. Secondly, he owns Core Nutritionals, so is he defined by being a bodybuilder? No, he owns Core. Thirdly, he owns the Nutrition Corners, so that's another one. And then fourth, he's a family man, he's a husband, he's a dad. So just because if one of those things are taken away from you, that doesn't necessarily define you as a person. So to become obsessed with one really takes away from all the others, in my opinion. And you should always have something else. One thing should not define you as a person. I know we're going off on a little bit of side tangent here, but just one of the comments that came through on Facebook just kind of had me thinking a little bit. And then Jeff also asked one other thing, kind of going along the same lines. At what point should you be concerned, or what point should you feel like you have to suffer? And that's a tough one, because when you start with somebody in a contest prep, you tell them that yes, this is going to be very challenging, but you don't really like to use the word suffer, and it is self-inflicted. We do choose to do this, right? It's something that it is self-inflicted, I would say. So that's you're definitely going to have to suffer. You're definitely have to become uncomfortable. You definitely have to get used to being at a low body fat, being cranky. Those things kind of come with the territory of pushing your body to the extreme. So at what points? That could be at different points for everybody. Now, I will say this is for those people who have been there before, who have been there, done that, I feel like from a mental standpoint, it does get easier as you continue to compete. So, for instance, I've gone through a season in 2011, a season in 2012, a season in 2015, and then this will be my 4th season here in 2018. So hopefully, from a mental standpoint, at least I feel like from a mental standpoint, I'm in a lot better position right now going into a prep, mainly because, I got the pro card out of the way. I've already competed in a pro show. I've already won a pro show. So, the pressure is kind of off me from my standpoint. Now, obviously, I have other goals that I want to accomplish, and they are lofty, and I've talked about those goals before. But, at what point should you be suffering? I mean, when you get close to a show, ideally, that's going to be like the worst part, a couple weeks out from a show. And then ideally, I would like to see you increase food into a show. But, I would say you have to definitely get comfortable with feeling, run down, sluggish, etc., just low energy, weak. Feeling weak is probably one of the worst things that people encounter during prep. And I remember, back in my last prep, I just straight up quit bench pressing because I was just too weak. I couldn't do 225 anymore. And before, I was benching, 300 pounds, and I was just damn, if I can't do 225, this sucks. And I remember deadlift being heavy, 275 on deadlift was heavy. And that's not something that's enjoyable, just to see yourself get weaker and weaker and weaker, especially for a natural athlete. You are going to become weaker, as you lose more weight because you're probably going to be losing muscle mass. And then one other aspect that Jeff did bring up was how to cope with going off the plan. And that means because we all screw up, right? Not everybody's perfect. I mean, I've gone off my diet a couple of times, not this year yet. I probably will. We'll see. But, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of my relationship with food. So first and foremost, it's when people do overeat, it is a emotional response. If I could say that, there's a reason why we overeat. Some of it might be hunger. Some of it might be because the way that we look, the way that we feel in the gym, and it's just, we're just feeling run down. And then we seek out food, as a crutch. So we try to eat our feelings. I'm not necessarily one to eat my feelings. But some people do. So how to cope with going off the plan. So one, evaluate why you've gone off the plan in the first place. And try to take a step back and understand why you made these poor decisions. And then secondly, get right back on track. Because the worst thing that you can do is just continue to go down that path. Because there reaches a point where you can come back from a couple of overeating, couple of binges, but there's a certain point where you're going to start packing on more body fat, even though you are in a deficit. You're going to start packing on fat if you continue to overeat, especially when you are very, very low body fat. Just because your body is primed for fat storage, obviously, when you are that low. So if you continue to overeat, you will store fat. So I would recommend just getting right back on the plan and trying to stick it out. Obviously, if you're working with a coach or somebody, let them know that you went off the plan, and they could really help you kind of navigate through that. So that's one, definitely one thing to focus on. I did have a comment here from Holly on Facebook. To get down to single body fat digits, Is it normal to pass out? Asking for a friend who really had prolonged prep where her calories went down around 900 for an extended period. He was told by his prep coach that if it's not for him, he can quit. No, definitely not, Holly. That is not normal for someone to be passing out. I mean, I've felt, a little bit dizzy, like maybe when my blood sugar levels drop, but not like to the point where I'm going to black out. I don't know if they were like cutting sodium or cutting water too, and that may have caused them to feel like they were going to pass out. And Jeff said, use the car swerve analogy. So I think that's where he was talking about, if you were to make an overcorrection on the overeating. So let's say you overeat, and then you try to make an overcorrection, and then you try to undereat, and then you end up just spinning out in this cycle. So I think that's where Jeff was giving that the car swerve analogy. And let's see what Jacob said here on Instagram. He said, do you find that having a planned workout or an idea of what you're going to do, basically just going on the fly, causes better progress? I feel I train better on the fly. Any idea of what I want? So Jacob, for me, I'm someone that really likes to, set new PRs in the gym. Like today, I put on Instagram me squatting. And it wasn't necessarily a lifetime PR. It was more of a recent PR with a body weight, and me coming back from a back injury. So I really like to see progress over time, and it makes me feel better knowing that, I did this weight last time, and now I'm doing this weight, and next time I'm going to try to do this weight. Now I can see where you're coming at, because as I alluded to earlier in the video, that your strength levels, will eventually go down, especially those of you who are, natural competitors. We do tend to lose strength because we lose muscle. So I could see with like training on the fly, how that could be a little better from a mental standpoint. Because if you are, changing your exercises frequently, you're not necessarily tracking the exact weights that you're using on those. So you might not actually notice too much of a strength loss. And although that could be better from a mental standpoint, that might not be good from a physiological standpoint, just because if a movement does get too tough, you may be inclined to drop that movement. So, I would at least try to keep track of your major movers. If you are somebody that squat, benches, and deadlifts, try to keep track of those numbers. Now, on some of your accessory work, if you don't want to, keep track of like lateral raises, because you pretty much do like the same for lateral raises or for bicep curls. But any major mover, I would say that it's important, and even secondary movement, to keep track, just because we want to make sure that the intensity is still up, especially when we're in contest prep. I really wouldn't back down on the weights or on the exercise selection just because something is too tough. Now, I did say earlier in the video that I stopped bench pressing, and that, maybe it was a good idea, maybe it wasn't. It's hard to tell. But for right now and the movements that I've selected, I know that, and this is what I do from time to time. And for those of you who watch my training videos, on my YouTube channel and everything, you notice that I typically do the same movements, and I might change them up every now and then. And it's not like I'm adding crazy amounts of weight. And now that I've been, in a deficit for a little while here, I would say my strength is not necessarily increasing at the rate that it was. I don't want to say it's decreasing yet, because I'm still, upping my weight from week to week because I'm keeping track of it. So that's why I would just really encourage you to keep track of everything that you're doing, just like you're keeping track of your food. Why don't you just keep track of your weight? I mean, I've had journals, that are like 5 or 6 years old, as long as I've been bodybuilding, that are in my desk drawers, that are all, folded up and beat to hell because they were in my gym bag for, years at a time, just full of weights. And I think that's actually the best thing that I've done, even throughout my off season and through my bodybuilding career, is just really keep track of my progress over time, because it just shows you how far you've come. And I will wrap up the video here in just a couple minutes, but I do want to, talk about just one more thing as far as mentality aspect, and approaching a contest prep, and kind of wrapping in all the topics that we talked about being obsessed, embracing the suck, and how to cope, if you were to go off the plan. So one thing that I would encourage to everyone is like when they do start a contest prep, it could be a good idea to try to actually pick up another hobby along the way. So, I mean, if you like always wanted to try to learn to play like a musical instrument or do something like that, something that's not necessarily going to like tax you physically, but it just like helps you focus mentally, that's something that I would encourage too. Now, for me, I haven't necessarily picked up anything like that, just because like now this contest prep, like I do have a significant amount of clients, and they keep me pretty dang busy. They keep me on my toes. I mean, every single day I'm getting emails, I'm doing check-ins. I'm responsible for other people, and my mental focus is probably the highest that it's ever been. And some people have asked me before, like, is this prep going to be harder since I'm coaching a lot more people than I was in 2015? And I really don't think it's going to be harder. I actually think that it's going to help me because it's going to make me be alert and be able to make high-level decisions. So I really think that that's going to be like my hobby, if I were to call it that. But I mean, that's my job. That helps me just focus. And honestly, it helps me not think about my own contest prep, and it helps me focus on everybody else's. So like my main goal, is helping like all my clients get to the stage. And then like my secondary goal in the back of the head is like, okay, I do have to lift weights today, and I do have to hit my numbers today. But I'm definitely not obsessing with that. So finding another hobby to do, or just focusing on your job or something else, is just really good to do. It helps you keep your mind off of what you're doing to yourself. So like that's one thing. Another thing as far as like approaching a prep, just making sure obviously that you've had like enough time off of stage. That's one thing, just so you don't get burnt out. These people that compete year after year, spring, fall, or even once, even every year, in the fall, you can get burnt out. Like I said earlier in the video, it's not easy what we do to our bodies. So just giving yourself enough time off can really just set you up for the mental aspect of it. And it's kind of funny. Like I almost joke with myself, and I sometimes joke with my wife that like I've been in a surplus for more or less like 3 years. And I told her, like when contest prep was starting here, obviously I've been dieting for weeks already, a couple months now, and dropping weight. I was like, it's time to get the scale out more religiously. It's time to, not go out to eat as much. It's time again. And I've had this 3-year off period. And I've been eating, I've talked about, I think it was in last week's video, like off season. Yeah, we talked about off season last week. And I do get a little bit looser in the off season. And then when I do start contest prep, things to really tighten up. And just because I've been off for so long, like I'm almost looking forward to the strict regiment of contest prep. And I know that it's not going to last forever, right? I know I can apply myself for 9 months, and because what I want to accomplish, right? Like I'm not concerned about sticking to the plan just because I've been off for so long. Mentally, I've been off for a long time. I've just had to focus on muscle growth. I haven't had to suffer through deficits. I mean, I've been in a couple of mini cuts during that time frame, maybe 2 and 3 years if I had to put a number on it. So just giving yourself enough time in the off season will also help you greatly, just from a mental aspect. And then the last thing, and for those of you who know me more on the personal level, I am very competitive. I pretty much want to win at every single thing that I do. That I want all my clients to win, and that just comes from a competitive bug that I've had ever since I was small. I've always wanted to win, but at the end of the day, and like I said, this is kind of tough to talk about because at the end of the day, it is just bodybuilding. It is just a hobby. we're not necessarily making a living off of competing. Sure, we all do want to do well, but it is not life and death. At the it's more of kind of something that we could say that we did a few times, or this is my hobby. But we can't just beat ourselves up over a hobby. I know everybody says this is a lifestyle, and yeah, absolutely, it is a lifestyle. But you can't just beat yourself up over how you place at a show. So don't let the mental aspect of after you're done with the show, because I feel like that's where everybody really struggles, is the post-show period. And I know this video is like mentality during prep, but I feel like the worst is after prep. We've looked forward to this single day for months at a time, and then it's over in an instant, and then we're left with nothing. Maybe we didn't place the way that we want, and if we, awesome if we do, but more often than not, we're going to lose in the sport. And that's a hard pill to swallow, just because there are so many competitors. The odds of us winning are not that great. Even there's a select few who can go into any show and win on command, and that is a very, very, very select few. For me, so like, sure, I do want to win this year, but if I don't place, at the tippy top, am I going to be crushed as a bodybuilder? Am I going to just stop? Am I going to cry in the corner and, not come out for months at a time and just get fat? Like, no, you just have to kind of roll with the punches. And sure, you have to celebrate the wins, but you can't be crushed by the losses either. And I've, even as a professional bodybuilder, my track record, I don't know like my win percentage. I know some people have that. I won't name drop any names. But I've lost more than I've won. And here I am today, still coming back, still eager to compete. So it's just, you can't, let one season, one show, even a couple seasons define you as a bodybuilder, because I feel like everyone's lost at some point in their career. Maybe someone say, oh, I did 1 or 2 shows and I won both. Well, congratulations. But if you keep coming back year after year after year, you're eventually going to get beat. I don't think anyone's undefeated. It's just really looking at it from the point of view of progress, and not just these individual instances where it's life and death. So I think that's where I'm going to cut the video, guys. And I hope it really helps you kind of understand from more of the mental perspective, like where you should be and what you should focus on during your contest prep. And then especially at the end of your contest prep, after it's over with, that can be a really hard time. And then once again, like afterwards, I'll finish with this, is you should, pick up something else new, like pick up something else to focus on, make up for lost time. If you feel like your relationships during that time span may have gone down, focus more on your wife, focus more on your kids. Go out, and enjoy a hobby that you used to other than bodybuilding. So don't let, bodybuilding or fitness, define you as a person. Think about what else you are. Like for me, obviously I'm newly married, and, I didn't want this particular contest prep to like tax my new marriage, more than it needs to, right? I mean, although I've been with my wife for damn near 10 years now, as a couple, this is our first year being married. And that's kind of one of my goals, is to not let this contest prep, negatively influence our relationship. Because once again, I have to spend the rest of my life with her. Like, I can't be just shitty with her on, the contest years and then nice to her on the others. So it's really just looking at kind of the long-term progress and really thinking what's most important in our lives. And Jeff, had the video, the idea for this video today. So Jeff, I mean, he's a business owner, he's a father, he's a husband, and he's a coach. He has a lot of other responsibilities too. So, bodybuilding doesn't define Jeff, it doesn't define me, it doesn't define Doug, like I mentioned earlier in the video. So I hope that kind of paints a little bit better picture of like the mentality, the approach, or at least my approach to my upcoming contest preps, guys. As always, I do appreciate everybody tuning in to these live videos, and we should be back next week. If anybody has an idea for a topic that you would like to see in particular, just shoot me a message. If not, I will come up with it on my own. You guys have a great night. Happy Valentine's Day for everybody who is celebrating Matt Jackson, happy Valentine's Day, buddy. Have a good night.